You know, there's an ancient text written on fragile bamboo strips more than 2,000 years ago that's all about war. It gets into the nitty-gritty of battle, of life and death. But here's the crazy thing. What if this ancient manual for conflict was actually one of the most powerful guides to achieving peace? We're diving into Sun Tzu's The Art of War, and as you'll see, it has way more to teach us about winning at life than it does about fighting on a battlefield. And that right there, that's the key to the whole book. It completely turns what you think about conflict upside down. Sun Tzu is saying that real mastery isn't about crushing your opponent. It's about being so strategically smart that fighting becomes pointless. It's a book about outthinking, not outfighting. So what this really means is, this isn't a book that glorifies war. It's a guide to using your intelligence to avoid it altogether. So that really gets you thinking, right? How can these principles, forged in the heat of ancient Chinese battles, help you with a business deal, a career change, or even just navigating your relationships today? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go back and meet the man, or maybe the myth behind it all. Okay, so picture this. We're going way back to around 500 BC. A scholar named Sun Wu, who we now know as Sun Tzu, shows up at the court of King Holu of Wu. He brings with him his 13 chapters on the art of war. The king, he's interested, but he's also a little skeptical of all this theory. He wants to see it in action. And this is where the story gets really good. So the king, not totally sold, challenges Sun Tzu. He says, all right, prove your principles work on my 180 concubines. So Sun Tzu splits them into two groups, putting the king's two favorite concubines in charge. He gives a simple command, and the women just start laughing. Sun Tzu doesn't get angry. He calmly says, if the commands are unclear, it's the general's fault. So he explains the command again, very carefully. And again, just more laughter. But this time, his response is different. He says, if the commands are clear and the soldiers still disobey, then the fault lies with the officers. And he orders the two favorites to be executed. The king is horrified. He begs him to stop, but Sun Tzu holds his ground. A general, he says, has absolute authority in the field. After that, with new leaders in place, he gives the command a third time. And this time, perfect, silent, flawless execution. He had made his point loud and clear. After all that, Sun Tzu sends a message to the king. He says, the troops are ready for your inspection. But the king, still shaken, says no thanks. And this is when Sun Tzu delivers this final, sharp critique. It's a pretty brutal takedown, but it gets to the very heart of his philosophy. Having a great plan means nothing if you don't have the discipline to actually follow through. What a story, right? It sets up Sun Tzu as this ruthless but brilliant master of strategy. But just when you think you've got him figured out, the whole thing takes a wild turn. We're talking about one of history's greatest intellectual cold cases. What if the brilliant, ruthless general from that story, what if he wasn't a real person at all? For literally centuries, historians have argued over whether Sun Tzu was ever actually a living, breathing man. So here's the issue for historians. That dramatic story we just heard, it comes from a history that was written about 400 years after it supposedly happened. But if you look at the most detailed, contemporary record from that time, a text called the Tzu that recorded all the wars, the politics, the major figures, it's completely silent. There is not one single mention of a general named Sun Wu. It's such a huge omission that a lot of experts think Sun Tzu wasn't one guy, but maybe a name that got attached to a whole school of strategic thinking that developed over many years. But you know, in the end, does it really matter? Whether he was one person, a group of people, or a total myth, the ideas themselves have been put to the test for 2,500 years, on battlefields and in boardrooms. The wisdom, the core principles, that's the part that's real, and that's what has endured. So enough about the mystery of who wrote it. Let's get into the what. What did he actually say? Sun Tzu was convinced that winning or losing isn't just luck. It's something you can calculate. And that calculation always starts with looking at 5 key factors. Before you do anything, he said, a smart leader has to assess these 5 things. First up, the moral law. Basically, is your cause a just one? Do your people truly believe in what they're doing? Second is heaven. These are the things you can't control, like timing, the weather, the general mood of the moment. Third, you have earth. This is your environment, the literal ground you're on. Fourth is the commander. That's all about the quality of leadership. And finally, method and discipline, which is your organization, your logistics, how you're structured. Only by looking at all of these honestly can you see a clear path to success. And this brings us to probably the most famous line from the entire book. You've almost certainly heard it before. It is the absolute foundation of Sun Tzu's entire philosophy, and it really breaks down into two critical parts. See, the very first step, the place where it all begins, is inside yourself. You have to start with a completely honest look in the mirror. What are you really good at? And let's be honest, where do you fall short? How disciplined is your team? Is morale high or low? Ignoring your own weaknesses is pretty much the quickest way to fail. It's only after you've done that honest self-check that you can really start to size up your opponent. What do they want? Where are they vulnerable? What are they best at? Sun Tzu puts it simply, if you know yourself but not the enemy, you'll win some and you'll lose some. But if you don't know yourself or your enemy, you're going to lose every single time. Now, once you have that knowledge, you can start to use one of Sun Tzu's most powerful tools, deception. And no, this isn't just about telling lies. It's way smarter than that. It's about controlling what your opponent thinks is real. So if you're strong, you act weak to make them overconfident. If you're far away, you make it seem like you're right on their doorstep to cause panic. You basically shape their reality to make them do exactly what you want them to do. Okay, so that's all fascinating ancient history, right? But how on earth does any of this apply to us today in our regular lives? Well, the truth is, it applies almost perfectly. Because Sun Tzu wasn't really just writing about armies. He was writing about human nature. Well, think about it for a second. In a business deal, knowing the terrain is just doing your market research, right? A SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, that's a modern version of knowing yourself and the enemy. Your whole marketing plan is a form of deception, shaping how people perceive your product. And what about subduing the enemy without fighting? That's a perfect negotiation, where you understand the other side so well that you craft a deal that they are happy to take, turning a potential fight into a win-win situation. So when you pull all this together, all the lessons about knowing yourself, understanding your opponent, using strategy, it all boils down to one final crucial question. In any competition, any negotiation, any challenge at all, at what exact moment is the winner decided? The most important battle is won or lost before it ever even starts. It's won in the planning. It's won in the preparation. It's won in those quiet moments of study and calculation before anyone makes a single move. The actual conflict is just the result of a victory that was already decided by better strategy and better knowledge. And that is the timeless, brilliant lesson of the art of war. The greatest contests are won not by force, but by foresight.